So hello, this is Basil Kilani with Tech Sparks. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome our guest, Dany Farha. Dany is a successful serial entrepreneur and investor. He co-founded Bait..com, the Middle East's largest job site, Butlers, the UAE's largest commercial laundry company, Intercat, one of the largest catering companies in the UAE, and Peekaboo, a Dubai-based children's play center. Dany was a seed investor in Gonabit, a Middle East company focused on daily deals that was acquired by Living Social in 2011. Dany, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So let's start by talking about your investment in Gonabit. You were a seed investor. What was the value proposition that jumped at you when you made that investment?
That's a great question, and I'll start by telling you I'm not the first and best person to see value propositions, but I will tell you that the minute I thought about everyone loves a deal, and so the good thing about that is everyone out there who is a consumer is potentially a customer, which serves the large addressable market question for investors. Now, merchants setting up a storefront online in the Middle East particularly is quite a procedure. It's expensive, it's slow, it's quite bureaucratic, and we're working very hard in this ecosystem to improve all of that. But until that happens, it's going to be very difficult to see a lot of storefronts up. So this solution, again, basically gives merchants, traditional merchants, brick and mortar stores, the ability to attract customers, but more importantly, get that online audience that they otherwise struggle to attract right now. So I think the value prop, again, from a consumer perspective, from a merchant perspective, from an investor perspective, the concept of it being so scalable, and I think I'll talk a little bit later about what scalable means, because people use the word scalability and scale interchangeably, and they can mean the same thing, but they don't often mean the same thing. So from a scale perspective, you can cover the region. Once you've built the platform, it becomes really sales and marketing prowess, and we know how to do that extremely well.
So, looking at the acquisition process, were you involved in the discussion within that process? And, looking at also just a general question, what areas do you think are poised for such exits that you think, startups could, focus on?
Okay. So I was very involved in the discussions internally with the team. I was not, it was the CEO and founder, Dan Stewart, who was the one leading the discussions with all of the parties. I have to admit, we were very fortunate, alhamdulillah, that we were approached by a number of suitors at the time. And it wasn't just a financial consideration, to be honest with you. So it's difficult to compare apples to apples. There were different types of offers on the table. Some were all cash, some were all stock, some were part cash, part stock, some were flexible. The pricing it's difficult, so parking the monetary aside, there were obviously lots of questions as to which jockey we wanted to bet on, chemistry with the management teams, vision of the companies that we were talking to, because this is, again, we're still in this business with them and running the business with them, and obviously Dan and his team are working with Living Social. So that was a key driver in our decision making of who to work with down the line and who to sell the company to.
Great.
On the subject of exits, I think, listen, we from a venture capital / private equity community, the first question they seem to ask themselves, and I'm now asking as well of the entrepreneur community, because particularly if you're in a fund structure, you have a limited time that you need to materialize and exit investments. Unfortunately, to be honest with you, I think it's sad that has to happen. Now, there are ways around that, but typically there is a time constraint and a time pressure to materialize gains. And so I think the concept of exits is an extremely important one. The M&A scene here has been improving significantly. I think there's a long way to go in the Middle East. But I mean, you can't compare it today to what it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. Obviously, capital markets are challenged. There is talk here in Dubai of us setting up an SME exchange, which would help significantly, not relying necessarily on trade sales and the M&A space, but looking for liquidity events through the public markets. But again, let's park all that aside. I think from an M&A perspective, it's obviously going to be a Western, probably US or European player that maybe is approaching maturity or is planning the eventual approaching maturity and will therefore look to buy and invest in growth elsewhere in the world. And I think within the tech sphere, I believe the key drivers for an acquisition will be where there is a differentiation through localization. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you're going to compete with an Amazon.com, I think you're going to have a very tough time. But if and let's talk about e-commerce, if you're providing customers with a product that is local, then I think that's a significant value proposition to an acquisition from a Western player that has difficulty, finding those products and building that infrastructure to serve a very specific Middle Eastern product. And it's just like a service. If the service can be local, and let's say if in the case of jobs, for example, where it's very sales and marketing on the ground dependent, as well as cementing relationships, not just with customers, but with stakeholders across the entire ecosystem, even from a marketing perspective, I think that's where it becomes much more of an interesting value proposition for acquirers outside. I think sectors poised are, and the logic I just applied, the philosophy, I think applies across all these sectors. So gaming, and I don't mean gambling, I mean gaming as in professional games, online games. But I think, again, if you're going to try and compete with a Farmville or the usual suspects, I think obviously it's going to be far less appealing, and I think you're going to have a far tougher time gaining traction than you would if you localized your offering to the audience from a cultural perspective, and that would be a wonderful acquisition target, I think. And so again, mobile payments and mobile marketing, I think that is less dependent on the localization, but obviously mobile marketing can be very local. Entertainment and lifestyle businesses, and again, music, sports, those kinds of things. E-commerce where it's local, products and services where it's local, particularly, and just marketplaces that make the region, let alone the world, a far more efficient, far easier place to get what you want done. I'm just being very generic there, whether it's jobs or it's any other service or product. I think that's where for us as Middle Eastern entrepreneurs or investors, that's where the acquisition, I believe down the line, acquisitions will come from.
So, Dany, you founded many companies that turned out to be great successes. In your opinion, if there were a checklist for a startup to focus on, what would it look like for you?
Okay, assuming I'm not critiquing the actual business model itself, just park that aside and say, okay, what do I need? Generic. We're
putting the investment side on, that's on the side. I'm, looking at the entrepreneurial side that, we could apply here.
Okay. So I think the first and foremost is find the best people. And again, that's a generic statement and it applies to all stakeholders. Find the best partners, find the best managers, find the best staff, find the best suppliers, find the best customers, work with the best. Now, I know it's a dream, and I think our objective here as entrepreneurs and investors is state the dream and maybe even overstate the dream and then try and aim towards it, and you'll be successful. Execution, I think, is key. I've seen so many wonderful ideas and so many wonderful people who have executed but haven't executed as well as maybe their counterparts have, and they've been out executed. And so I think execution is key. Execute like mad. Managing expenses, there are lots of wonderful sayings that a lot of successful people have on this particular subject. Steve Jobs is one of them. But basically, run the company as though you really don't have any money in the bank, even when you do have, and things are going well. I think that's an attitude one should adopt. Now, I'm not suggesting one should be stingy or shortchange staff or suppliers, not at all. But what I am saying is spend on the necessities, and then on the luxuries, just make sure that you're looking at your cash your cash management and every day, as far as I'm concerned, and just make sure that there is an ROI objective behind, all investments. And the last thing is innovation. You need to continuously innovate. And again, it's not just on the product. I think a lot of people, when the word innovation is used, they think innovation from a product perspective. I think innovate across the board. How can you sell better? How can you market better and better and more efficiently at the end of the day and more effectively? How can you do it differently? And how can you build a unique process from within that is difficult for competitors to emulate, that gives you that competitive advantage from an execution perspective? How can you dispense and innovate in the HR realm? And what I mean by that is take care of your staff better, make it a much more enjoyable workplace, and so on and so forth. So I think innovation applied across everything that one does, and every person in the company needs to be thinking about evolving. I think that those are, for me, the sort of checklists and the difficult things to audit, to be honest with you, from an investor perspective, because some of them are human character traits, and you can speak them, but you may not necessarily, live by them.
So, you're an investor, and they also just founded Beit.com Capital, your latest adventure. If I'm a startup, what are the major characteristics you look at to say, hey, this is a yay or nay?
Okay. I'm going to give them to you sort of incrementally. Talk about, well, they're all very important. So I don't want to necessarily state one over the other. But I think the first thing that we look at is it's going to be a simple idea. Can we understand it? I've seen some great ideas out there, but they're so complex to understand. And in some case, I think they're communicated in a very complex manner, and they can be communicated in a very simple manner, or they really are just complex. So a simple idea that preferably solves a big problem or a significant problem. And if it doesn't solve, because not every great business actually solves a significant problem, but they address a significant need. And I think when I think about what is it that, a Facebook does that addresses, it wasn't solving much of a problem as far as I'm concerned, but there was a need obviously there. It just made things a hell of a lot easier. So the value prop there was, just convenience gains, if you like. So there must be a significant game changer from a value proposition. If it's not a big problem that's being solved, if it's not a big efficiency that's being introduced into the marketplace, or a convenience that is significant enough for everyone, for a large enough addressable market to care about it, to basically use it, then I think so. Those are the main criteria from a simple idea and a problem-solving idea. I think team. The more complete the team, the better off everyone is. Obviously, I think it's rare to find a complete team, but we like that. And I think within the team as well, to see strong leadership and execution capability. And again, if people haven't done much before, it's difficult to critique and sort of benchmark off of execution. But I guess you can still go back to what they've done in their previous lives, whether it's in sports or their academics, etc. You really want to see a track record of being able to execute. But it's a difficult one to audit for and to look for. A large enough addressable market. I mean, there are some great businesses that can on a standalone basis be wonderful, but on a standalone basis, and maybe they don't make a national, let alone a regional business. And I think it's important for us and the investor community that these businesses can become sizable enough. And then scalability. And if you remember, we talked about scalability a little earlier on. And here what I mean by scalability, because I said a large addressable market, and that is scale. Scalability for me is revenues grow, faster than your expenses, disproportionately, but in a positive manner to your expenses, and that's scalability, and that's a wonderful thing that we look for as well.
Sure. So, Dany, you wear two hats. You're an entrepreneur and you're also an investor. What do you think is the right time for a startup to raise capital?
It's a great question, and one that I've given a lot of thought to and continue to give a lot of thought to. And I think, look, if you can seed the business yourself as an entrepreneur, obviously I believe you're far better off doing that. And now it depends what seed means. It depends what you want to get to seed. But let's just stick with that for a second. So if you can see the business yourself, you're far better off. Why? Because at the concept stage, at the greenfield stage, at the idea stage, there's so much risk. There's so many unknowns that it's probably going to be quite dilutive for not a lot of money. So now let's move beyond that. And I think there are probably 3 or 4 stages in a business's cycle that one could look to fund the development of this company. And they are, and again, they're in no order. I mean, the ideal would be to have all of them. I'll describe to you at the end, an ideal investment and say this has all of them. If you have a prototype, obviously you somewhat de-risked it from a product standpoint. If you have a team, preferably not just the one person, the entrepreneur, preferably at least a second person, you've again somewhat de-risked the investment, or improved the risk-reward profile. If you have a product that is being used by an early adopter community, again, and these can be in cumulative fashion, or you can have one of the 3 or one of the 4. And the ideal, obviously, is you have revenues. So, the ideal time to raise funds as an entrepreneur, if you need to raise funds, is seed it yourself, build the prototype. But again, it depends on how deep one's pockets are, or how much time and money it costs to do all these things. Right. Build a prototype, find a team member, even if the team member isn't on board full-time with you right now, which would be ideal, but someone who says, I'm in, and that is a committed team member who can create value and join the team, subject to, a seed round or a post-seed round. And then obviously, if you have revenues, we seeded Bait ourselves as founders. And when we went to raise money from VCs, we had already built offices. The product was up and running. You could build a CV and, apply for a job and get hired. We had revenues. They weren't very large, but, we had most of these things already de-risked. It then becomes, is there market uptake, and can these people execute the business, I guess.
So you just brought up the story of Bait. You were the co-founder of Bait and also the CEO for almost a decade. What's the secret sauce of Bait that made it the dominant player in the market? Was it the first mover's advantage, or there was more to it?
What's funny is we actually weren't the first in that market. There was a company out of Egypt, and they were doing extremely well. They had launched just ahead of us, maybe, I don't know, a few months, 6 months. And they were making a big noise, particularly in the Egyptian market. Now, if you look at where we ended up and where they ended up, I guess it's everything we've just spoken about. It's having, first of all, a plan and having a strategy. It's then having, a great team and great people all around to everyone has to do their part. And then it's executing like mad. It's execution. You got to go out there and you got to get things done. And then it's continuously innovating. I think, Bait yesterday just launched a total revamp of the site with all sorts of, wonderful features, wonderful tools for everyone concerned, both employers and job seekers. And that's just a testimony to how they've just raised the bar so far ahead of everyone else that, from a business process, it's difficult to copy, let alone from a feature perspective. So I think that, in a nutshell, is the secret sauce.
Are the market conditions different now than what it was when Bait was created? And if so, what do you think is better or worse?
Listen, I remember going to meetings going out to meet with prospective employers to have them subscribe to our services in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, even as far as the mid 2000s. And I'm talking about, markets like Dubai and Saudi. Forget the smaller markets where IT infrastructure was far better than the smaller countries in the region, whether it's even in the GCC and the Levant and North Africa. So, I'm in a meeting in Dubai or in Saudi, and I'm trying to demo the product online. And, I'd click a tab and I'd turn around and speak for a few minutes while the page loaded. That was how I did a demo. It would take an hour. Now, the good thing about it is you'd get to know your customer because you have so much time to speak and get to know them as people, their business, their needs, so that you can serve those very specific things and localize your solution. So it was actually enjoyable as well. And I met a lot of wonderful people, in the decade that I did that, and I went out and saw customers. But boy, was it frustrating. I mean, I'd come back home sometimes, pulling my hair out and just wanting to cry. It's like click, and you'd have to wait. So from an IT infrastructure perspective, it was I'm trying to use not such a negative word. It was pathetic. Mm-hmm. And then internet penetration was a joke. There really wasn't much of an online community, growing very, very quickly, but still from a very small base to very small numbers nominally. And then the investor community was just not there. I mean, the angel community wasn't there, and the VC community certainly wasn't there, and even the angel community, I beg your pardon, were, and still, it's changed a lot with a few success stories, and particularly the global success stories, and even more so the local success stories of internet companies. But investors in this part of the world, they still like the building. They still like the physical asset. They still like the hard asset. Tech companies don't have any assets. It's a low asset, low capital intensive, people heavy business. So it's a far better place. I think the last thing is, when we also launched in the early 2000s, there were very few other online properties. I mean, you'd have to go to a US site. You'd have to go to Yahoo or CNN or, that's news. For whatever you wanted, your content was being served to you by the West. There was nothing locally that was interesting. And why does that affect you? Because people didn't care about the internet, because why should I go on? There's just nothing that's relevant to me. So there's a job site. Yeah, okay, so I can find a job. That's pretty important. But, beyond that, you need that critical mass. And I think now, today, there's a lot of stuff going on online. There's a lot of content, and it's only gonna get better. So yeah, you can't compare today to 12 years ago or 10 years ago.
So earlier on, you mentioned that the team is crucial, and obviously Bait is a place where you could find the right talent. Can you give us any tips on finding talent, such as keywords, areas to look at, and things like that nature?
Sure, I can. I think, look, the wonderful, without blowing the horn of Bait or its solution, but the wonderful thing about the way you use Bait is it's very, very intuitive. You can do a lot of cool things. It's actually quite unique as a tool globally. So, look, keywords are very, very important, particularly if they're relevant to a unique skill set or the skill set that the employer is looking for. And if you use them more frequent, then you have a better chance of being up at the top of the list. You become more relevant, but you also don't want to overuse a keyword too much. Otherwise, it doesn't look very good in the presentation. I think Bait is unique in the way that you use the tool. So as an employer, you search by city or country of residence. You say, I'm looking for someone who's living in Riyadh, who has, 5 to 7 years of experience in sales and oil and gas. You can be that specific with our search tool. And so keywords are important, but I think if you've got your CV laid out in a manner where people can find you because you are relevant to them, i.e. you're living in the right city, you've got the right skills, you've got the right years of experience, you're in the right industry, those things are taken care of by the tool, which is wonderful, which is why keywords, while they're very, very important, it's more important that you get your CV built correctly. So that's number one. Number two, obviously keywords are important, but I think no matter what you do, and this is me speaking not just from being my experience with Bait, just being an employer. If the CV isn't well written, then you're going to struggle to make it into the short list. Making the long list is one thing. The long list is normally 100 CVs. The short list is 10. Making it into that 10 is crucial, and then you need more than keywords for that. And that is, you have 10 seconds to make an impression. So the CV, an employer will look at a document and will say, right, if they can't clearly see brevity rather than saying, more. So be brief, be to the point, clearly communicate your value proposition to the employer. It's a marketing document. Where you can, you've got to highlight achievements. I know, I think I probably see like 1 in 20 CVs with achievements on it. And I think those are the most important thing that employers look for. And again, if you're a fresh grad, you have achievements. You must have captained your football team, or you must have won a gold medal. Those are things that demonstrate leadership and achievement. So you got to communicate that. So now I think, so it's constructing the CV correctly so that you feature in the long list. It's keywords so that you make the long list and have a better chance of getting in the short list. But then again, short list to interview, it is presentation, and then obviously, how you sell and market yourself to the employer directly.
What pointers would you like to highlight today that would be important for entrepreneurs to focus on in order to be successful?
Great questions, Basil. And I think I'm going to start with what I think is probably one of the most important ones, and that's be humble. Now I know it sounds like a fuzzy-wuzzy recommendation, but I think be humble. If you adopt it as a philosophy, it can be very, very powerful. And one example is listen to everyone that talks to you about your business. I know it's frustrating. I've sat at times where people are telling me to do things better in a manner that I thought was absurd. But you need to listen to all these things, and one day that feedback in a month or a year or 2 years will be lodged in your mind, and it'll provide a valuable data point. Plus, if you hear things more than 5, maybe even 10 really times, that's the theme. That's no longer feedback, and that you need to know, you need to act on that. So I think just be really humble about the way you execute and the way you listen to everyone around you, staff, customers, stakeholders, suppliers, everyone. The second thing is evolve. No matter how high up on the mountaintop you are, if you don't continuously evolve, you will become that dinosaur. You will no longer exist. And you can survive sometimes long periods of time without evolving, but if you're talking about the long term, you need to evolve. You need to continuously evolve. And again, I use evolve and innovate interchangeably. I just mean figure out ways to do things differently, do things better, and continuously add value across the board, not just to the customer. I'm talking about within the organization. Execution, just execute. You need to have a plan, and you need to aim to outperform that plan, and then you'll hit your targets and you'll be comfortable. Be very, very fiscally disciplined. I remember many years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, reading about Bill Gates' philosophy of having the paranoid need to have 12 months of cash in the bank, assuming zero revenues. And for him, it stemmed because he was hiring his buddies, Steve Ballmer and these guys that were out, and Paul Allen, the guys who started out with him at the beginning, were his friends. And he never wanted to be in a situation where he couldn't pay salaries to his best buddies. And I think that philosophy, you have 12 months of runway in the bank, assuming that little revenue, if anything at all, comes in, and carefully manage expenses. And then my favorite, people. Just work with the best people, get the best advice, whether they're advisors, try and find the best investors. I know this is it's a wish list. It's very difficult to actually go out there and do, but I think if you aim to work with the best people across the board, all stakeholders, whether they're investors, advisors, partners, staff, suppliers, everyone, just work with the best.
Dany, once again, thank you for your time today. And before we close, actually, I wanted to ask if any entrepreneur would like to inquire and ask for funding or ask you guys for support, where should we go?
They can email us at liftoff, so LIFTOFF at Beco Capital, which is BECO Capital, CAPITAL.com. Or just go to the website, becocapital.com, and there's Apply for Liftoff. There's the Apply for Liftoff tab, and you can email us there, or you can fill in the application or attach your business plan.
Great terminology. Thanks, Dany. It was
Thank you, Basil.
today. Thank you.